So we're very grateful, all of us at 4THBIN, and I hope Prima and Bob as well, to really talk about and present a subject that I personally feel like there's a lot of purpose, behind in terms of the environmental aspect of it, but a lot of risk as well that I think gets overlooked. So I'm gonna walk you through, or be your MC, I suppose, for the next 45 minutes or so. The reason why Prima and Bob are with us, Bob being sort of double virtual in this case, is being in the business ourselves at 4THBIN. It felt a little bit like an infomercial, or a little too self-serving for me to sit here and explain to you and try to build your awareness around the environmental risks and which include legal risks and the financial risks and reputational risks around dealing with your obsolete IT equipment in the correct and ethical way. So what we thought would be a good option would be to have e-stewards and iSigma come in and speak about those specific topics, because this is a two-pronged issue that we deal with, both from an environmental and security standpoint, because they're frankly the preeminent thought leaders on the topic, and frankly they're the ones that certify all the companies that kind of live up to what we feel are the highest standards in the industry. So Prima will give some remarks, but I'm going to first, we flip this around a little bit. I'm going to first play a short video from Bob, and he's couldn't make it tonight, and he felt so bad about it. He did what looks like an MSNBC version of an interview, and we'll get to handle some questions as best we can from him. Then we'll wrap up, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. But I did, given the opportunity to be in front of this group, I did want to spend just 2 seconds on 4THBIN and who we are, because I think it's important to get some perspective, because we are proud to be a New York-based business and proud to be part of SIM New York. So we've been around actually more than 12 years. Serve over 10,000 clients, or I should say have served over 10,000 clients in the greater New York area. And to be honest, we do business from Boston to DC to Pittsburgh. I would say that's 90% of our business. And then we've got a number of clients on the West Coast and in the Southwest that we handle as well, that have headquarters in New York. And one of the things that we're most proud of is that in that 12 years, we've had 0 data breaches. So not a single bit or byte has escaped our clutches. At the bottom of the slide, you see obviously what we're very proud of, and this is something we work very hard at, is maybe Prima will attest to. We're e-Steward certified, which is not an easy certification to obtain, neither NAID AAA, a couple ISO certifications, and also extremely proud of our participation as a B Corp company. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is how we've really helped the environment. So think of the last slide as more of our kind of bragging around data slide. This is bragging around what we do for the environment. So in that period of time that we've been in business, we have effectively diverted 10 million pounds of electronics and related accessories from landfills to put them back into productive use. If you look at the icons along the bottom, I mean, some of these are generated, for instance, the 14.5 million pounds of greenhouse gases that have been saved from the atmosphere. This is an MIT calculation that they do based on the amount of material that gets recirculated back into productive raw material streams. 298,000 pounds of toxic material as part of that 10 million pounds. You may or may not know that for as much as we love these devices, computers, laptops, iPads, phones, I mean, they do contain a significant amount of heavy metals, which is the reason for their exclusion for the most part into landfills. Of that, another 289,000 pounds of lead diverted, and over 1 million hard drives destroyed, again, without a data breach. So with that short infomercial, I am going to hand it over to Prima, sorry, Prima, I'm going to play the
the video. Yeah.
video from Bob. So I'm already pre-programmed to do the other thing.
Okay.
Let me go to share screen again, and you are all now going to witness Mr. Johnson for 10 minutes or so.
Hey everyone, my name is Bob Johnson. I am the CEO of iSigma, and I want to thank you for letting me participate in your conference this way. I wish I could be there with you in real time, but things kind of got wonky for me, and Paul was nice enough to let me try this via recording. So I'll try to be quick. I'm not going to touch on as much as I could, honestly, and Paul knows this is true. I could talk about this stuff for more than an hour, but we're just going to touch on the highlights of what iSigma is, what NAID AAA certification is, and then kind of just the issue of ITAD disposal and data protection. So first of all, again, I mentioned Bob Johnson, CEO of iSigma. iSigma stands for the International Secure Information Governance and Management Association. You don't have to remember that. That's what iSigma means. What it is it's a trade association for the secure destruction and secure record storage industry. So our member companies, just like any trade association, we have member companies. They are in the secure information destruction business, paper shredding, computer recycling, and also in data storage. So electronic data storage, box records data storage. I mean, that's kind of the world they come from. We have about 2,000 member companies around the world. Now, that's iSigma. And like all trade associations, iSigma exists as, it does what trade associations do. We advocate on behalf of our members. I think the good news and the unusual, and maybe it's a little unusual as a trade association, and I've been around pretty much from the beginning now. I think I'm in my third decade of being the CEO of the organization. But we operate from the premise that clients are the best thing we can do for our service providers, and the best thing for reputable service providers in our industry is an educated client. So in that regard, we've kind of also acted as the consumer advocates, if we will. And while, again, we're on the side of our members to do what's best for them, usually, invariably, doing what's best for them is also best for the client. And that's where we start with. And NAID AAA certification, and to explain the difference, NAID was a trade association that kind of preceded iSigma. But NAID AAA certification had become so popular that it was written into thousands of contracts, and we just kept that name for the certification. And it's a certification for data destruction service providers that validates they're doing what they need to do to be compliant with the regulations and also have adequate security to protect the data. We develop those specifically by looking at the regulations. We modify them on a regular basis based on the evolving regulations, and you probably know they change a lot. So that's where NAID certification comes from, and it is a voluntary program. Not all of our iSigma members are NAID AAA certified, but those that are required to comply with the very stringent standards that we've developed, and you can see them freely online. I'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes, really. But and when I say comply, what I mean is we actually have scheduled and surprised audits that we conduct around the world using an independent network of accredited security professionals. So we've developed those relationships with them. It's a very active network that we've created, and we're very vigilant about that. And as I mentioned, because of that, NAID certification has caught on around the world, is far and away the most successful and accepted data security accreditation or certification of data destruction operations, certainly around the world, and maybe of any kind of certification. So that's iSigma, and that's NAID AAA certification. Now I want to talk about the data protection side of things, specifically with regard to IT asset disposal. We know that the organizations you guys work for spend tens of thousands, if not sometimes millions of dollars protecting information when you are using it, when it's actually active information that's in your possession. We also know, however, that you have a lot of options when it comes to getting rid of that media. But the one thing we both know is that media is where personal information is going to be, you're going to find personal information that you guys were entrusted with, and you're also going to find competitive information on that media. So it comes to the point, you've got to get rid of it. Now you've got to do something with it. So there's two things you need to think about in that regard. One is the law, and one are the risks. They go hand in hand. I mean, the law is essentially a risk, right? And this speaks to certification clearly. Every data protection regulation in the world, whether it's the GDPR in Europe, the PETA in Canada, I mean, every country now has a data protection regulation of some sort or other. We have a bevy of them in the United States. They all require that data controllers, that is you, the client, be able to demonstrate that you've done vendor selection and ongoing monitoring of vendors that are handling the private data, regulated data that you're entrusted with. So the companies you choose to dispose of IT, or how you do that, they are data processors under the regulation, and you've got a regulatory mandate that you should be able to show that you conducted the proper due diligence in selecting those service providers. The challenge of that is, of course, that most organizations don't have the luxury, the bandwidth of conducting initial and ongoing due diligence on the vendors that they've hired to do these things. Second of all, even if they had the time or the bandwidth to do the initial and ongoing evaluation of their data processors, usually they're not going to know what to look for. We have a saying at at iSigma about NAAA certification that you have two choices. One is you can either use a NAAA certified company, or you can use our specifications as your own way of evaluating those vendors. Again, initially and in an ongoing way, because the laws are very clear, you have to do that. But let's talk about the risks. Let's forget for the moment that the laws require that you protect private information. On the legal side, by the way, we often lose sight of the fact that if you're not protecting your competitive information, things that you consider to be trade secrets for your organization, if you can't demonstrate you're protecting them, including when you discard the information, you lose your right to those claims to those protections in law and in court. So you've got to be able to show that you're protecting it at all points, including when it's discarded, or you're even putting your proprietary information at risk. So personal information, obviously the law says you got to keep that private. And then, of course, there's the competitive information. So one of the risks, obviously, of improper disposition, selecting a shoddy vendor, not worrying about where it is, not tracking the devices all the way till they get to the point where they need to be destroyed. All of those things, shoddy practices, put you at risk from a legal perspective. And so besides the law part of it, however, you've also got to worry about the risk management part of it. So I'm assuming that if any of you took the time to, let me back up. Think about the scenario where IT assets go out into the world, and perhaps along the way, either proper due diligence wasn't done internally, or the vendor themselves is a shoddy vendor and not doing what they're supposed to do. And some breakdown there. One of the ways the law enforces the due diligence requirement is by holding you, the client, the data controller, legally responsible for the mistakes of the service provider that they hire. So that's another way that they build in that due diligence.
Chris?
But more to the point, if you
I didn't realize you called.
when you discard an electronic asset,
Let me,
it's very apparent where the electronic asset came from because it's your firm's information on that electronic asset. So that's not gonna escape anybody if it falls into the wrong hands, or it comes to light somehow that this personal information has gotten away from you, or even your competitive information has got away from you. Now imagine that those do get out, via a channel that allows that media to be out there with the information still on it. It isn't like it's going to go anywhere. I mean, that is essentially a time bomb. There's no statute of limitations on your obligation to protect personal information that may be on those devices. And should that device surface in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, and it's established that your organization did not do what it was supposed to do as far as protecting that information, even if it's the fault of a shoddy service provider who didn't do what they were supposed to be doing, you're going to be held responsible, and it's going to be clear. So imagine explaining that to your risk management departments or the CEO of your company to say that we don't know what happened to these things. We're not sure. We can't be sure what happened to them. Knowing that these are like ticking time bombs that could be floating around in the marketplace for however long. If you knew they were out there, if you knew there was something wrong, obviously that would be a problem. So it presents an intolerable risk proposition from a risk management perspective. No risk management officer, no CEO, no competent executive would be able to tolerate a world, tolerate the problem for an organization of having those devices floating around out there in the marketplace to turn up whenever they might turn up. So again, you can tell I can spend a lot of time talking about this stuff because I live and breathe it on a daily basis. But from both the legal perspective, being able to demonstrate you've done the proper, you've selected a proper vendor and they've done the proper thing, even to then mitigating the intolerable risk management proposition of not doing that is nothing but a horror story for any organization, and one that's so easily avoidable by simply making the right choices when it comes time to get rid of the electronic equipment. So that's my what I tried to probably did took 15 minutes to do what I wanted to do in 5. I very much appreciate again you allowing me to come to you via recording. I appreciate how difficult it might be on your side. I love when to answer questions, and I'm guessing that you have a lot of them. Maybe you can get them answered in the rest of this session. If you can't, you can go to isigmaonline.org and find my address, or send me an email. I'm relatively available. I talk to clients all the time about these issues and challenges that they're having. We have a lot of resources for our members. We have a lot of resources for clients. Just about everything I spoke of is on our website. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I hope it was of some value, and I'm sure you'll have a great rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Bob and Abstentia. Now I'm going to hand it over to Prima. You should have control.
Thank you, Paul. Just trying to find my screen. Okay. I hope everyone's able to see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction earlier, Paul and Cindy. I am Prema George, the Certification Director with Eastwards. If I'm looking in this direction, it's not because I'm side-eyeing, but my monitor is there, so pardon me. So the East Towards mission so perfectly coincides with the need for sustainability. So we set out a few years ago after Basel Action Network's discoveries to ensure the global electronic waste is not dumped in developing countries, so giving rise to serious health, environment, and socioeconomic problems. We then enhanced that program to envelope all relevant issues of social and environmental import with respect to electronic waste and asset management to create a one-stop shop standard from occupational safety to data security to global trade treaty compliance. So what BAN has discovered over the last decades is that too many times in the world, people use the word recycling or recyclable, and we are led to believe that it's going to be recycled and recycled sustainably. What we have learned is that sadly, that's not the case. So what you see in this picture is our executive director, Jim Puckett, filming a scrapyard in Hong Kong, where it's just left unattended with no safety precautions whatsoever, with people working in extremely hazardous conditions. So recycling, like any industry, can be highly dangerous and polluting if not done correctly. So in many places in the world, it is substandard and barely meets the purpose, and quite honestly, awful. So in the case of electronic waste, we were the ones to first expose this. So in this picture, you'll see this was in China. So with our report, and there was this film that is available for you to see. It's called Exporting Harm. We filmed creating a new awareness, and we showed that what really happens to the waste that we send for recycling. We revealed impoverished and desperate people trying to extract value from this material, and in extremely dangerous ways. So in this backdrop, banded along with Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, they decided to investigate the international trade in electronic waste. BAN investigated an area in China and later released our findings in the report Exporting Harm. So the report sent shockwaves around the world when it was discovered that electronic waste was diverted from landfill and then sent to recyclers, and actually instead of having it recycled, it was actually being exported to Asia. So it's a similar story here, but this is in Africa. Based on this investigation, we made our report and filmed the digital dump. So this brings us to talk about the Basel Convention. So the Basel Convention is all about addressing this ugly mismanagement of recycling done overseas in substandard conditions to avoid the real cost of properly management. The waste travels thousands of miles on a pathway with the least resistance, as people simply externalize the cost and bring harm to people that won't charge them for any cost for the damage that they have created. So this is sadly still being done in the name of recycling and is very damaging to the earth, the workers, and the communities around there. So in this map, you'll see the countries that have ratified the Basel Convention and the countries that haven't. So there are 176 parties to the Basel Convention. 193 total member states are in the UN. So 12 other countries in the world that are not UN members. So the red indicates Basel signatories, but have not ratified the convention. So the US, Haiti, and Afghanistan. US is the only developed nation not to ratify Basel Convention. So and ironically, United States is one of the world's most wasteful countries, failing to ratify the world's only waste treaty designed to protect developing countries from the waste trade. In lieu of the Basel Convention being ratified here, we decided that the next best option was to create a voluntary standard and certification, so to drive the market to be able to take voluntary responsibility. So that is what we've done with East Towards. This is our leadership council. It's not the current council. Paul is going to join our leadership council effective January. So in the next picture, hopefully when we meet in person, we will all be in it. So we haven't met because of COVID. This is the earliest. So you will see that it's a community of members who form the council. This includes individuals, institutions, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and governmental agencies. So with the primary mission of upholding a safe, ethical, and globally responsible standard for e-waste recycling and refurbishment. So, so the standard is basically the governing document to all Eastward certified recyclers. So electronic waste is hazardous waste, and for the foreseeable future, that's how it's going to be. With heavy metals, rare earth metals, and toxic organic compounds will continue to find their way into our IT equipment. So we at Eastwards are very concerned about the toxic footprint of products and their end-of-life management. So unlike other standards, we have designed our to be able to address a wider range of hazardous materials, which we call collectively materials of concern. For these, we forbid export to developing countries, and we also provide strict guidance on how they are managed all the way to final disposition. So as I mentioned earlier, so we are a community of people from different walks coming together, and whose mission is to ensure that these guidelines are strictly followed, and those toxins and MOCs throughout the whole chain is taken care of, even after it goes to an Eastwards processor, which is our due diligence process. So we take the process and disposition of hazardous waste very, very seriously. So, so if you are an enterprise looking to recycle responsibly, you can become an Eastwards enterprise by committing to use the only Eastwards certified recyclers. So this is some of our Eastwards enterprises. So from the beginning, we've had strict data security requirements, but now with that issue becoming more complex and beyond the knowledge set of ISO 14001 trained auditors, we've joined force with NAID. You heard Bob speak earlier. So all Eastwards processors would require NAID AAA standard for electronic media as part of the Eastwards requirements. So to be Eastwards certified, a processor needs to be NAID certified. So July 2022 onwards, all of our processors will be NAID certified. So now on the issue of sustainability in electronics, it would be remiss if we didn't discuss the core issue, and that has to do with the design of the electronic equipment. In our work, while we focus on end of life largely, we are determined to point also towards the greater need for getting all toxic materials out of the equipment, making the equipment last as long as possible, and designing for repair and reuse. So finally, products need to be designed in such a way that it is easily recycled. Sadly, the industry still fails to properly think about the end of life. It's hard to get manufacturers to think about sustainability while designing. So it's a classic problem today, and hopefully we'll find a solution soon. So another problem is to do with the Internet of Things and electronic vehicle batteries. We will address that in a bit. So in terms of the issue, I've been asked to talk about the biggest challenge the electronic industry faces now. So the number one problem is that there are way too many actors who will tell you one thing, but will be doing something else. Unless they're compelled by law or loss of business, they will find the cheapest and dirtiest way to recycle. So when we look for recyclers, what we do is just Google, and there's a list of recyclers will show up. They will make tall claims about their recycling procedure, but if you ask them where their waste is going, they will not be able to say. So most of these websites will brag about like corporate policies and different certifications, but they themselves won't know where the waste is actually going. So to avoid this fate, for responsible actors and businesses who actually take this issue seriously, East-to-West is the answer. The second problem is the Internet of Things, electronic proliferations. While Internet of Things is having our devices connected to our day-to-day activities and making life simpler for all of us, it has added a problem of just about everything in our lives, from clothing to furniture and buildings having embedded circuitry and hardware. So, but where is the plan for proper collection and management of these devices when they become unrepairable and obsolete? So that's another serious problem. The third problem is EV batteries. Again, another thing that takes pride in being environmentally sound decision this will be increasingly used in cars in the days to come. So we've looked into this, and the global response to what to do with EV batteries is nothing short of just sad. The claim is similar to what we hear for plastics. Don't worry, they will be recycled. The state of affairs is to export them for extended use to countries who are not equipped to deal with them. So when they need to be recycled, that shouldn't be the end of the road. Then the plan for recycling is to simply grind them up so they are no longer flammable, and then it's sent off to a smelter to burn off the organic materials and recover only a small fraction of metals. So we're going to have mountains of this material very soon. But as usual, the concept of design for recycling seems to have been forgotten by the Elon Musks of the world. So that's another problem. So this is part of the East-to-West transparency project. So we have a program called the Earth Eye program, where we affix GPS trackers to the waste that leaves recyclers' locations, and we track where it goes. So that's how we ended up finding them in developing countries in Asia and Africa. So here's a case study. Total Reclaim used to be an East-to-West recycler. So it's an interesting story because it happened in the state of Washington, right in our backyard. Total Reclaim claimed that they were following the rules, but shipped hazardous waste to developing countries. So they were literally our poster child as part of our regular checks, where we do this tracking. We use tracking devices and using our in-house software. And then that led us to a dump yard in Hong Kong, which called itself a farm. These videos are available on our website. You can see them. Immigrant workers were working on hazardous waste with no health or safety precautions. So here, images, zoom again. So this is the evidentiary report that we filed against them, and then strangely, exporting hazardous waste is not a crime in the United States. But we were able to charge them because they did represent to their customers. So we drafted and submitted our evidentiary reports. Federal investigators found falsified documents to prove their claim. The founders were charged with fraud, and they were sentenced to prison. So they were found to have conspired, and they profited to the likes of about $15 million by exporting toxins and hazardous materials. So that's the reclaim summary on the screen. So in conclusion, I would urge you to understand that recycling is not always recycling, and standards also differ greatly from one another. Look closer, look deeper, and once you do, we're sure you will be attracted to the ethics and innovation approach of East-to-West. So if you have any questions, feel free to write to me. My email is prema@e-stewards.org. And Jim Puckett, I think, is on the line and later on for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can ask him. He is the expert with decades of experience. So thank you, Paul. It's from me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Prima. I think I can share one last time. So just a quick wrap up here. I hope, again, the point of the conversation, or at least the presentations, was to raise the level of awareness. So hopefully the messages regarding environmental and financial risks are rather obvious: proper versus improper, legal versus illegal, ethical versus unethical, however you want to define it. What I find interesting, and it resonated for me when Prima was talking about the Basel Convention, was that really in this country, only, I think right now, 26 states have laws forbidding the entry of electronic waste material into landfills, which is a bit shameful, to be honest. With respect to the financial breaches, the cases that Prima referenced were interesting, but if you look at the high watermark for financial or privacy data breaches, within the last 12 months, we set a new one, which is $60 million, which the SEC levied against a relatively well-known bank in this region, to be honest. So really, I guess the point is, as you, leaders of large IT organizations, think about risk mitigation strategies, and I've been involved in enough public board meetings around risk mitigation, which is an SEC requirement. There's a lot of discussion around what I call hot data, so network security hacks that happen, tens of thousands of times a day. But really little emphasis is given to cold security or cold data. And I realize it doesn't appear to be as much of a risk as the hot data. There are not bad actors kind of knocking at your door, again, at every minute. But I would ask that you consider some sensible strategies. And I think that the frameworks that eStewards and NAID or iSigma have provided in terms of environmental and data security are extremely well thought through, and again, extremely tough to live by. I can speak firsthand about that. So as you're thinking through your risk mitigation strategies, consideration of cold data, I think would be highly well advised, and I think your shareholders and your board would appreciate you. So I guess the one image I'll leave you with here, if you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and one of the last scenes, the knight says to Indiana Jones as he's looking for the chalice, choose wisely. So, as Prima pointed out in that great graphic, I mean, there are a lot of folks out there that claim to do this and do it well, but, unless you kind of have the seal of approval, I would kind of ask you to think 2 times or 3 times about it. So again, highly grateful to have the time to speak to you guys tonight and to share this information with you, something that we're all very passionate about. And happy to take questions. And thanks again to Prima and Bob for putting so much time into this.
Shar is asking, it is said that only 10 to 15% of electronics are recycled because of the toxic materials, and proper and safe recycling costs more than the materials are worth. What are some ideas and incentives being explored to reduce recycling costs?
Good question.
I'll grab that one. This is Jim Puckett with the Basel Action Network. As Prima mentioned, far too often manufacturers are not thinking about end of life when they make the electronics. They're thinking about giving you fancy bells and whistles and exciting stuff. And unfortunately, the answer to your question lies with design. So if they were to design things that were not toxic, there would not be all this expensive liability of dealing with the hazardous materials. If they design things that you could actually readily recycle, so if they use common materials and screws and don't use glues and things like that, it would make recycling a lot cheaper. So all these answers lie with design. And but more and more people are realizing, and all of you as customers need to realize that recycling is a service. This isn't some way that people get rich off of scrapping things. Those days are long gone. They're providing a service to prevent pollution and harm to the whole world. So really, you need to pay a recycler to do the job. They're not getting rich anymore from gold and copper. Thank you. You would think that would be more the case. If you really look at these batteries, the only thing that's really valuable to a recycler right now is the cobalt. And the cobalt is difficult to obtain because it's mostly in Congo, which is a place fraught with all kinds of civic unrest. And so it's really a conflict mineral, the cobalt. But more and more people are realizing, wow, that cobalt's expensive. Let's bring the price down. Elon Musk is doing this, for example. He says, we're going to get rid of cobalt. We're not going to have that in our batteries coming soon. And so that eliminates, unfortunately, the real incentive for people to recycle them unless there's somebody subsidizing it, recognizing that it's a service to prevent just massive amounts of pollution all over the world. So you're right, there's mountains of these batteries going to be growing. And right now, the answers you're getting from industry are very poor. They say, well, we're going to reuse them. We'll send them to developing countries for providing lighting and backing up solar panels and things like that. But that can only be for a few more years of worth. And then they become waste. And what is going to happen when they're all in Africa or Asia or Latin America? So it is a real concern to us that we're following the same pattern of not paying attention to the obvious problem that's coming down the road. But it's going to involve the fact that we're going to have to pay for doing it properly. It's going to cost money. You're not going to get rich from the value in the scrap.
Yeah, I think there needs to be on the battery side, there needs to be some advocacy around legislation to require, you know, whoever is putting the material into circulation and profiting from it in the first place, almost like a carbon tax, you know, some responsibility to deal with it at end of life. So if you look at back to electronics, I mean, there are a few states in this country that have a program where they require Apple, Samsung, LG, you name it, to recycle or pay someone for the credits of gathering their old material to recycle them. But frankly, it's even in the states that it's enacted in, it's not very widespread. And frankly, getting information on those programs is very difficult. Honestly, it's a little too clandestine from my perspective as a person who's willing to go help solve this problem. But the 10 to 15% of the recycling isn't necessarily because it's difficult to recycle the materials. It's more that there's not a lot of incentive to do it. Yeah, I think these you know, Sustainalytics and ISS and other folks in that corner of this world need to, you know, need to start taking a harder look at the E, as you mentioned, right, and how people are really addressing that. I mean, most of the sensationalism and the celebrity of this is all around, you know, going net neutral or net zero in 2050, 2030. And I just saw GE shareholders pass their resolution today to do it by 2050. But I don't know who's actually doing the hard work of tracking this and putting out, you know, valuable information about whether or not executives are really holding themselves accountable, or boards are holding the executives accountable for implementation of these things.
Yeah, I don't know if it was clear from Prima's talk, but the GPS tracking that we do has been a game changer. I think you heard that the one we caught out, Total Reclaim, was an E-Steward certified recycler, and they kept double books. And so when the auditor showed up, everything looked good. So we went to our community, the E-Stewards, and said, what do we do? And they say, we want to be tracked. We want this to be part of our program. So now we regularly put GPS trackers into the stream in a hidden random way into our Eastwards recyclers materials. And that's part of our enforcement program.
There was a great question. I can't sure, I don't see who exactly asked it, but Jeffrey answered it about we've been working with New York City Environmental. To be honest, we've been on quote lists before from different departments within New York, within the city, and sizable amounts of really industrial waste. So it includes everything from CRTs, believe it or not, which are still in use, to cords and printers and you name it. What happens in a lot of these cases is when we quote this, as Jim mentioned, I mean, this is a service. I mean, we pay a lot of people to do this professionally and ethically. What happens is folks will come in and really just bid on the scrap value, and that's nothing that we can really compete with. And there may be 5 or 10% of the total tonnage that's got some scrap value. What happens to the rest of that? I honestly can't tell you. I mean, I would love to have Jim's GPS tracking system on some of these shipments, but I mean, the problem is that and again, this is an awareness issue that we're desperately trying hard to solve, is that people just frankly don't get that there are companies out there that do this ethically, and there are companies or there are bodies like Stewards and iSigma that make sure that those companies are living up to those rules. I've got friends who run larger enterprises, and when I've approached them in the past about what they do with their obsolete equipment, the reaction is normally, not sure, let me go ask my CIO. And in pretty much 9 times out of 10 cases, they'll come back and say, my CEO says it's taken care of, right? And we donate it, and or we do this or that or the other thing. We have a company that does this.